22nd, 2011. If I could ask the superintendent to please take a roll call.
Ann Mayer.
Here.
Carol Chelman.
Here.
Rebecca Emerson.
Here.
Dexter Legg.
Here.
Ann Walker.
Here.
Mitch Schulman.
Here.
Tom Martin. Leslie Stevens.
Here.
Clay Haywood.
Here.
Kent LePage.
Here.
Linda Brulette.
Here.
Liz Boynton.
Okay. So if we could just have a moment of silence before the pledge. And I would just want to recognize the date today. Today is the 22nd of November. It's a date I'll never forget, when one of the presidents of the United States was assassinated. So maybe we could keep that in our thoughts as we bring the country together. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll entertain a motion to accept the minutes of November 7th, 2011.
So moved. Second.
Any discussion about that? Changes, alterations? Want to take back things you said you wish you hadn't?
Too late.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, thank you. Nobody signed up for public comment tonight, but if there's anybody out there who would like to speak, we'll still open it up. Okay. Seeing none? Thank you. We'll move on. Superintendent's report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we begin, I'd like to thank all the middle school musicians, Miss Kern, Miss Randall, all the staff of the middle school who came out this evening to share kind of what's going on in their classrooms. It's very much appreciated. Also not in the superintendent's report, but of note, I think, is I'm hoping folks had the opportunity to go to the play this past weekend and see Beauty and the Beast. Mr. Stokel's son, and the cast and the musicians, and it was just rather an incredible performance. It was really spectacular if you had a chance to see that, so kudos to them. I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the football team who on Saturday, after 30 years, has brought home the state championship with a great game over in Bedford. And I also, not on the agenda, but would like to, I'll follow this up with an email to board members, is we've scheduled a new school board member orientation for Friday, December 9th. Both Mary and Patrick are able to come, and that's wonderful. And typically what we do is invite any board members who are available for lunch to come in. So it's a free lunch, Dexter. If you'd like to join us, that'd be great. And just to meet and greet folks. And I will, as I say, I'll follow up with an email to you later. But in your packets, you have the December elementary school lunch menu, the latest board and administrator, and then a compilation of some materials on class size that I've provided for you, as well as minutes from the first elementary facilities committee meeting. You have a letter from Lynn Pallarino, who after 10 years of service here in the district, she's been an English language learner instructor, announcing that she'll retire in June. That's the superintendent's report. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have about that.
Yes, Kent.
Mr. Superintendent, I also would like to introduce Denise, who will be also taking, as I stated in the non-meeting that we had prior, this has been a difficult time for the LePage as a whole, and I want to thank the efforts of the administration. Those that don't know, over the last 2 years I've had a hearing deficit that's been going. 4 weeks ago I lost total hearing. It was pretty bad for the last year, but 4 weeks ago, and again, publicly want to thank Leslie, who tried to do this, and it's an amazing technique, and we all have life revelations, and this has been a big learning experience. I will be going in for an operation on Monday. Thank you. But Denise will also be scribing to the board.
Welcome, Denise.
Thank you.
1
Okay. So we have some old business to contend with. Consideration and approval of the 2011-2012 school board goals. So once we vote on these, we'll put them up online. So maybe I'll just spend just a couple of seconds to just talk a little bit about what we have laid out here for our goals for the year. This is very much along the same lines of following up what the school district has been doing over the last few years in terms of its instructional strategies that we believe in what they're doing to support the district's mission to educate all students. So the district has been working to ensure through professional development that all teachers are given multiple opportunities to regularly get together either by grade levels or even sometimes in larger settings across grade levels and across buildings to work together to make sure that the curriculums align and that lesson plans are honed and sharpened, and then they're also looking together in teams and also across grades at how students are doing at some assessment data that they're getting, and they're trying to identify all those kids who might need a little extra boost, a little extra help to move them along. And we're also trying to implement policies and practices that allow the district to, organize itself better, to reassess. So over the course of the next year, we're trying to improve how the district would retain, attract, and develop the talent with professional development, belief in that's an important thing. We're looking at the K through 5 facilities programs. So all these goals will be posted on the website. And I also think that, we're trying to stay on track with one of the board goals that's been on this list, since I've been here, and I've only been here 6 years, is doing better at communication. And I think that one of the things that we've begun to see out of the administration is an improvement in the about how the district is, not only how we're doing, but what we're doing through the annual budget metrics that the superintendent has been putting out for the last couple of years, looking outside the district and trying to better evaluate ourselves against cohorts that exist that we've identified as a board that we think are sort of similar to our district to see how we're doing. And also, the last goal would be to examine ways to ensure district resources are aligned with strategies to achieve the mission of the district. So, and there's a little narrative that I'd encourage people to read when we put it out so everyone can see what the district is trying to do. Just a quick little summary.
So I'll make a motion to approve the 2011-2012 goals as presented.
Second?
Yes, discussion. Yes, Carol.
I think that the administration board really has a strategy. I think the administration knows exactly what it's doing in terms of what our goals are, what our mission, what our vision is. I think the administration is very focused, and I think it's shown in the results in improvement in the school district. And so I think we're really on the right track. I think the administration's on the right track. I think the board is in line with the administration. So I think, we've got the right roadmap. We're going the right place in the right way. But I personally will not vote for these goals and for these goals as they're written here because I don't think that these do a good enough job of articulating what a good job the administration is doing and where we're going and how we plan to get there. I agree with the chairman regarding the importance of communication, and I don't think that these goals do a good job of communicating who we are, what we value, where we're going, how we're going to get there to all audiences. And so I think that I'm not going to vote for them. I've spoken at a couple of other meetings about my concerns about the way they're written, and it doesn't appear that there's any support on the board for rewriting these, writing these differently, working on this some more. But I personally am not going to support these and vote for it, but not because I think the administration is not on the right intact, because I firmly believe that we are. I just think we could do a better job communicating to the larger community who we are, what we're doing, how we're going to get there, and say it in a way that's decisive. And so I just think we could do a lot better than this. So I'm not going to support this, but I do think that the administration is on the right track.
Thank you. Okay. Let's make this a roll call vote?
Okay. Carol Chelman.
No.
Rebecca Emerson.
Yes.
Dexter Legg.
Yes.
Ian Walker.
Yes.
Mitch Schulman.
Yes.
Leslie Stevens.
Yes.
Clay Hayward.
Yes.
Kent LePage.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, Ann.
When the superintendent was sort of recapping the fine weekend with kudos all around, it was wonderful. But we also, on Thursday of last week, had a chance to go to Lister Academy, as much of the community was there for their Thanksgiving lunch, dinner. And then the next day, we were invited to a school. I happened to go to John Darrow and had turkey again, which was really nice.
Back to back.
And really had a chance to be involved in the community, and it was really, really, really nice. So I thought I would mention that.
Thank you.
So moving on to the next item, we have second reading of two policies, the drug-free workplace, drug-free schools policy, and the safety program. And if I remember correctly, these are two required state policies. So I guess we can take, if no one has any objections, we can take those together. So entertain a motion to, yes, Clay?
I'll entertain a motion to accept both policies.
Second?
Second, great, thank you. Any discussions? Make this a roll call vote.
Yes. Carol Chelman.
Yes?
Rebecca Emerson.
Yes.
Dexter Legg.
Yes.
Ian Walker.
Yes.
Mitch Schulman.
Yes.
Leslie Stevens.
Yes.
Clay Hayward.
Yes.
Kent LePage.
Yes.
Thank you. So, we had a visitor this week.
Last week, yes, last Thursday.
Oh, yes. They just kind of blur into one another.
So I just wanted to provide folks a little brief update. Commissioner Barry visited all three of our elementary schools, and as Ann noted, she did attend our JL's community Thanksgiving celebration, which was wonderful. On Monday, Steve Zadrovic and I attended a meeting with her and a lot of members of her DOE Title I team up there at 230 in Concord. And there were a host of districts that were represented. There were Manchester, Nashua, Salem, Derry, Rochester, Dover, Portsmouth, etc. Basically to kind of have a conversation and solicit input about, what the issues are around changing the state's policy on providing choice to non-Title I schools that are in need of improvement. Which is to say, in our particular circumstance, providing choice to Little Harbor School. And really, the way that plays out amongst various districts is there are different views of that, different interpretations of that. But I think she took a lot of input. We said our piece to her about, what we felt we needed to say. She's going to take that under consideration, and I think in the next month we can expect that there'll be some movement. If I had to, she made her own remarks in the paper, so folks can look at what she told Joey when she was here on Thursday, but I get the sense that she's trying to create some flexibility for districts, but somehow also find a way to honor choice, particularly for those who have already exercised it. And so, there are some complicating things around using Title I funds for transportation, and if you make a blanket change in policy, what does that do? So there's some balancing that needs to be done, but Steve, you can add anything if I've missed it. But it was a great visit, and it was a nice meeting on Monday.
Dexter.
So just to confirm that, you think that within a month she'll actually have a ruling?
I believe so. How they're going to approach that particular policy piece, the state-level policy. Right.
Okay, great.
Absolutely.
Because the sooner we have that information, the better it is for us to, if we have to, put a plan in place to respond to it.
That's right.
So we would, if she doesn't rule within a month, I would encourage us to circle back and encourage her to give us direction.
I think she will. I'm confident.
Good.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Kent?
The question is that after the commissioner comes back with her decision, then she has to then give it to State Board of Education, and then do they then have to give it to Governor's? I mean, there's a hierarchy. It isn't going to be answered just with her decision. Is that a correct assumption?
You know, it's not clear to me to what extent she's got to take that to the state board, but I think that may be part of it. Right.
Federal funding, it comes down to state legislator to have decision-making.
Well, it wouldn't be eliminating federal funding. One of the...
No, I know, but they might want to stick their nose in the tent.
Right. So it's hard to know what level of involvement she's got to go next. She didn't clearly communicate that to us. I suspect there's probably others she's got to run it by.
Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome.
Okay, thank you. Next, central office.
Yeah, so I thought it'd be an appropriate time to update the board on, verbally as well, on central office and the... Excuse me?
Downtown.
Where are you going? Oh, glad you asked. Basically, I want to share with the board, we've been working very closely and well with City Manager Bohanko to kind of solve what we see as some short-term space issues at the Little Harbor School for next year and thereafter. And basically what we're doing is we're looking to move to the 4th floor of City Hall. Which is on the same level as the manager and the legal office and HR, et cetera, and it's in the old wing called the Cybolt building. So what's going on now is he's working with city staff, Steve Parkinson and others, to basically come up with an appropriate number for renovation. I mean, it's an old hospital up there on the 4th floor. There are still plumbing for bathrooms, et cetera, and so there's some level of work that would need to be done. But he did share with me that what he hopes to do is get a number in early December and take that to the city council. And what he is hopeful to have happen is to take that to a reading December 19th and a vote where he can use undesignated surplus funds to make that happen. Assuming that went well, then in the new year, shortly thereafter, they can get started on renovating that space. On our end, we're looking at working with Chad Weathers and looking at what it's going to take to renovate the Little Harbor central office area into the 4 kindergarten classrooms that Doran Whittier had actually contemplated in its design. Where Chad's made it clear that if it's just internal, just kind of renovating the interior space, that can be done easily in July and August. So we're moving forward with funding for that project in the CIP for 2013. What we're not clear of, and Steve is working with Ken Lynchy to find there's some fire issues, some fire code issues, and whether or not egress concerns are going to happen on the outside. Once you get into the exterior of the building, then I think it becomes a much more expensive project. So we're still working on that, and but it'll go through the CIP process in 2013.
Rebecca.
So the internal configurations are just sort of going to be a temporary fix
At Little Harbor?
at Little Harbor?
No, we'd try to do it as it was intended, as K classrooms on that design.
So I guess then my question is, what's going to happen with the rest of the building, and as that needs to be renovated, and who knows?
That's part of the longer-term process with...
Yeah, so how, I guess my question is, how does this fit in with the longer-term process? Like, we're committed to keeping this building, keeping this school here, and that's my question is, are we going to renovate that area and do it right, which is more expensive, knowing that we're going to keep this building and stay in that location moving forward, or are we going to look at more of a temporary, take walls down, put up some partition kind of thing, because, what the elementary facilities, are they going to come back with a recommendation that, we raise the whole thing, or, so I'm wondering how this all sort of fits in with the, 5, 7, 10-year outlook down the road.
Well, our thought was to configure the space as designed by Doran Whittier. Now we'll have, and what can we achieve there? Well, we're talking about the real piece would be whether we can sprinkle those 4 classrooms for fire safety and issues. If not, then you've got to go into the egress pieces that would have to come later in any event, and whether or not folks would sign off. So it's an unknown right now, Rebecca, to say whether it's $500,000 or it's really cost prohibitive. But my thought would be we'd want to do it right in the first instance.
But that's assuming that we're going to stay in that
Right, well-
building and keep that building, and if we consolidate schools,
But the goal is to have 4 classroom spaces to accommodate the extra staffing. And we've made a decision that K is the appropriate group to separate from the
Yep.
rest of the student body because they're on the other side of the multi-purpose space. So that's kind of how we're thinking. Mr. Lancaster.
So a couple of thoughts, partly to Rebecca's point. I mean, the estimate would come back to this board anyway for consideration and approval. And so we'd have an opportunity, if we felt that the renovation was too expensive, to say no. But anything that the facilities group is going to come back with is longer term. I mean, the monies that we're contemplating for any elementary school enhancements, if you will, are at best in the 2016 or further. So it's out 4 or 5 or 6 years, and I would suggest, given our experience with the middle school, that whatever we kick off is not going to be quick. And so we're going to be using the Little Harbor classrooms, I would predict, even if we're going to want to raise the thing, it's going to be 8 or 9 years. If you think about how long it took for the high school to get through it, if you think about how long it took us to the middle school, anything that's major is just going to take time. And so unless the number that came back for the internal renovation was exorbitant, then I think it probably is going to be money that is not going to be used, those classrooms are not going to be used just for one class year. I think we'll use it for, I think a bunch of them,
Right.
I think,
Okay.
if history is any indication.
Yeah.
Right. So in a sense, there'll be walls as opposed to movable partitions. They'll be more permanent.
yeah, that makes a wonderful point about the longevity. I just didn't want us to be doing all of this
Short-term
renovation
thing.
and then move out, so,
And do it over again.
somewhere else, right, no, that's,
I think it's going to be long.
This really seemed like the perfect thing to do, to deal with the overcrowding that is
Right.
there, because there need to be more classrooms there. And the previous architects had already had a
Right.
plan, figuring that there could be four classrooms. And the kindergarten issue, if we can do the sprinkling and can deal with that, that will be ideal. And that will take care of things for the next foreseeable few years, until we see what's coming down the road. Thank you. So, sounds like a plan.
Kent?
I think if we go back and we think of when we first had the discussion about, the configurations of the elementary schools, we said we had 2 parallel tracks. One is a short-term type of decision. One is a very long-term decision. Oddly enough, I think they both go with a decision that, Commissioner Berry is going to lay back one way or the other on us. One has to the short term may have to be accelerated to a degree. The long-term one is the one that we want to take the time to make sure we do the proper processing of what is best educationally for the kids. And also that's, consideration for taxes and cost. We know there's no extra money coming this way in the next few years. And as I read here, you can just look at out the window here and see the library. It was 26 years. It wins the prize.
We get to the right answer, but it just takes a while.
Right.
Waiting for it.
Yeah. Anyone else? Okay, thank you for that update. So moving on to some new business.
Yeah, so you have letters from 2 staff members at Dondero who are going out on maternity leave shortly after the new year and are actually asking for an extension for the remainder of the school year to be out to attend upon their child. So I would recommend you approve Ann O'Connell's request for extended leave of absence, as well as Misa Pignataro's request.
Second.
Take them together. Any questions? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. So the next piece is the consideration and approval of the superintendent's contract. So I just have to say, time goes so fast that I was a little stunned that it's coming up in July, it's time to actually reconsider the renewal of the contract. And I thought it was an appointment for life, myself. So we've had some conversations, the board has had some discussions, and we've all come to agreement that we would like to offer a new contract to the superintendent. What I'd like to do is pass out to the board so some information about the changes between one contract and the next. There are not many changes to this contract, but I just want to walk everybody through it, if that's okay. Is there enough? You can share. So basically, the superintendent was asking for, and we've agreed, it seems to make perfect sense, because we're very happy with the job that he's doing, for a 4-year contract instead of a 3-year contract. And so the 4-year contract would commence July 1st, 2012, and would go up until June 30th, 2016. In terms of the salary, I think just to be open and above, what I've put on this sheet of paper is a little bit of salary history for the superintendent, and I just want to remind people, so when the superintendent 3 years ago was hired, we had agreed upon a certain amount of money. And it was $134,000. That's what we had agreed upon for the salary. If you remember back, this was at a time when unions were negotiating still for contracts. The city was asking all of the unions that hadn't settled, the teachers were the only ones that had a contract in hand, for 1 year, for 1 year of zero. And then they would begin the following year after COLAs. So I just want to remind people that when the superintendent was hired at that salary, before he even came into the district and came on board, he offered to take the equivalent 3% cut from his initial opening salary. So that was a sacrifice on his part. And I would say, and then over those couple of years, he's gotten the COLAs as they've been as the 10-year rolling COLA average. And just so people know that over the 3 years that we've had this contract, by making that one small little move, which I thought was very generous on his part, that saved the district a little over $12,000 that we would normally be paying every year now, based on what he took, the reduction he took, plus the COLA increases, and every year it was less and less than he would have made had he started out as his original salary. So in this next 4 years, what he's asking for is, again, I just think a very generous proposal, which is that he will start his first year in the contract at the same salary level that he has this year. So he will not seek an increase at all for the first year, and then after that he will just have his COLAs as they are set, but the 10-year rolling COLA average. And pretty much that's kind of mostly the information about the contract, and you'll see if you look at it that there's also just some information about the contribution the district makes to his 403B, and I think, the superintendent, when he moved from one state to another, and I agree with this 100%, needs to look out for his own interest in retirement, and would like to actually try to put more money into that account. And so we've given him the flexibility to do that in this new contract. So that's where it is. Does anybody, we'll take a motion to extend the 4-year contract to the superintendent, and then we can have a conversation.
I move that we approve the contract.
Second.
Okay. So we're open to comments?
Well, I guess I'll start.
Okay.
I actually like the idea of a 4-year contract. I mean, we've had 3, what I would say are increasingly effective years under Ed's tenure. He's taken us to a place in a district that I think those of us that were on the board when he was hired had aspired to, but speaking for myself, wasn't sure we were going to get there. And I think we've in a short period of time, have come an amazing way. And so for me, in fact, offering 4 years is I think, positive for the superintendent, but also positive for us. Knowing that we're going to have him at least as long as I serve on this board. That was a joke. But also, nothing, but in addition to that, is nothing but beneficial for the district. So absolutely support it. I think it's terrific.
Yeah. Kent?
Catching up here, sorry. Yeah, I agree with Dexter. I think a 4-year contract is very similar to that of elected officials, as much as you're saying that's a joke. 2 years, and I'll stand on my grounds, is too short for the city council and for Congress. They're running for office on a continuous basis. As it's well noted, the first contract was, I did not support, was not because of Ed. I've had the discussion with Ed 3 years ago. There were things that I needed to feel better about in the contract. Again, no reflection on Ed. He and I had a very candid discussion back then, and that it is. He's shown a sense of community, which is tough, I'm sure, on his family. He lives, 35, 40 minutes away, and yet he does that balance. I'm sure the balance isn't as well at home at times. So this will, and again, I go back to the budgetarily a good move of the city. Anybody, I'm sure the press tomorrow will have some type of headlines that, there's a big number there. And the number is the number. And I think if you compare it across the state, those with the same amount of time and place will have very similar contracts with different little caveats equating to the amount. I will support it this time, and again, appreciate the work that Ed has done. Thank you.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, Beth.
I just wanted to say, regarding the whole putting some of the salary into his pension, is tax, it doesn't cost the taxpayer anything. So that's, there's no impact.
Right.
So I just want to say that. Essentially, all of this, there's really no impact to the taxpayer. It's almost like, I feel like, what's the, do I even really just say this? But I think that Ed is definitely doing a fantastic job, in my opinion, and I think just about everybody in the district. He is so responsive to parents, to everybody, and I think that the taxpayer is getting an incredible value with Ed as our leader. I think he sets an example for everybody in the city. And I think, if this is how Ed wants his salary structured, then, I think it's appropriate, and I support it.
Ann.
I was originally the chair of the Superintendent Search Committee, and so when we received all the applicants, right away, leader of the pack, and he has definitely fulfilled everything we had hoped he would. Particularly in terms of our goals, when we let him know what our goals were, working really hard to implement them in a way that we felt really comfortable about. I like the 4-year idea as well, as I'll be here another 4 years.
Anyone else? So I just want to say, I think Ed's done a fabulous job in the 3 years that he's been here. His communication with the board, his communication with the community continues to be excellent. His monthly reports that have kept the board and the community up to date, covering student achievement throughout the district, professional development, and the budget process. He's led the school board through a process to choose a cohort of districts. I thought that's been very helpful, against whom we evaluate our own progress. The educational metric booklet that he's published this year and for 2 years in a row has met with high praise from many sectors of the city, and I think his annual budget presentation to the community and also to the city council was clear and articulate, and it pretty much very clearly explained the school district finances and the dilemma that the board has faced in these budget times. The district has a strong commitment to professional development, staff development. We believe, the administration believes, the superintendent believes in the power and importance of professional development. He and the administrative team are on top of school improvement issues with a plan that includes a multi-pronged approach, I think, and we've been trying to explain that over time, to professional development, building professional learning communities, to have teachers work together in groups, setting aside professional development time throughout the years for teachers to look at student data, to develop interventions that for students that teachers think are struggling in particular subject areas, as well as ensuring that teachers are working together to develop and address specific learning goals that they set out at the beginning of the year and looking out for the welfare of the students. And he reports this back to us regularly throughout the year. And I think he also has excellent, exceptional, I would say, people skills, and that's appreciated both by the board and the community. And he's been building excellent trust and relationship with city council members, but also, most importantly, with the APT. And I think that really sits well for the district moving forward, that the union and the superintendent have a very fine working relationship. He's instituted job descriptions, which really, for all of us, is the first step into moving into what we were looking for when we were actually hiring Ed. We talked about this. We wanted somebody who would come in and actually begin to put in an evaluation process in place, a teacher evaluation process in place, and he's come up and we voted on pretty much, I would say, 100%, maybe a few missing, of all job descriptions in the district, so we can begin to hold people accountable and evaluate them to the job that they're supposed to be doing. And I think that's really an important piece of what's happened over the last few years. And I wholeheartedly support this. And I will not be around for 4 years, but I still would vote for it. So let's take a roll call vote.
Carol Chelman.
Yes.
Rebecca Emerson.
Yes.
Dexter Legg.
Yes.
Ann Walker.
Yes.
Mitch Schulman.
Yes.
Leslie Stevens.
Absolutely.
Clay Haywood.
Happily, yes.
Kent LePage.
Yes.
To vote. Thank you.
Welcome on board.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Appreciate that. Thanks for the kind words. Thank you. I have to step for
Okay.
Now, don't mess up.
Okay, so the next piece is really the workshop. We're going to talk about class size. It's been an issue that's been around for a while, and it's been brought up numerous times, and so the superintendent's going to walk us through a little PowerPoint, and I was very happy to see homework and reading assignments over the holiday seasons.
Me too.
But actually, I've started to read them, and they're pretty good.
Actually,
Yeah, about halfway.
see what I should...
It's interesting.
Can I ask a question while this is happening?
Yeah, sure.
Is this whole report going to be put online? Because I know that in the past there have
In this
been...
bibliography?
Yes, yes. Because I know in the past there have been a lot of people who have questioned class size, does it even matter? And I think as budget season comes up, it would be nice...
So I don't really have a problem with that.
I mean, it's
But
all public information anyway.
I don't really have a problem with that, but I do think, and this is the librarian in me, right? There are articles here that are from journals, right? So it's okay to do what we're doing here and making it public and available and people looking at it. It's just it just raises a gray area and questions as to whether we can actually make a copy of it and publicly post it online if we don't have the right to do that. You know, just in terms of copyright issues.
So maybe we put online
So some of these
what
could
we
easily
can,
go on.
and then put a link and say, due to copyright infringement,
Well,
it's
some of these
it's
might
available.
actually be links, and I'll have to check with that, to places that exist online, so we could actually do that.
Yeah.
And some of this stuff I don't see an issue with. I'm only thinking about some of the ones that actually might come from, specifically from journal articles.
Right.
Well, you could leave a copy at the reference desk
At the
public
library,
Right.
Yeah.
But some of this other stuff clearly is not an issue.
Because
That's my only
it's
concern.
come up before during budget season, and
Yeah, no, I
sure it
totally
will
agree.
again.
Right.
So pardon my back, because I'm going to have to work the machine and talk a little bit here, but one of the areas the school board has established as a goal is to articulate criteria around appropriate class size. And so in order to kick off a little workshop session, I prepared a brief PowerPoint intended to highlight some of the research summaries and articles we pulled together on class size generally.
You're good.
So, the question we asked was, what does research say about the impact of class size on student achievement? And looking at this question, I offered the following headlines before I took you into the presentation. So the first question is, research analysis really yields mixed results. While there are many studies and meta-analysis, and many folks would believe that there are too few research studies of high enough quality to be instructive, some of the seminal work would reveal that smaller class sizes produces the largest and most consistent gains among disadvantaged students in the early grades. Smaller class sizes produce many benefits when class size is below 20 and it's sustained for more than 3 years in the early grades. You'll read much about, in the materials I've shared with you, about the costs associated with class size and wonderings from folks how more study needs to be done on looking at other variables. For example, teacher quality and effectiveness, and perhaps spending money there versus spending money on reducing class size. And achievement aside, I think all studies confirm increased teacher satisfaction and the fact that parents believe smaller class size leads to much more personalized learning environments. Next slide. One of the reasons I think studies and the analysis is mixed is due to the use of pupil-teacher ratios in some studies. Some analysts confuse, overlook, or even conflate the distinction between class size and pupil-teacher ratios. Class size refers to the number of students enrolled in a particular class, whereas pupil-teacher ratios refers to the total school enrollment divided by all the professional teachers in the building, including support personnel. So to be sure, there's a vast difference when we're talking the number of teachers who instruct students in a classroom on a daily basis versus the total number of professional staff who work on behalf of children divided by that total population. So there are hundreds of studies examining the association between variations in class size and student achievement. We looked at the research, as I said, to determine whether or not class size reduction has a positive impact on student learning, and if so, how much, for whom, and under what circumstances. And there really are 5 studies listed on the right-hand side of that slide that I have shared with you in some materials. 2, which are very influential and credible studies that support the effectiveness of smaller class size. The first is the Tennessee Student-Teacher Achievement Ratio experiment that was conducted in 1985. The second is the 2001 Wisconsin Student Achievement Guarantee in Education, otherwise known as SAGE. There are a couple of studies that have mixed results. There's the California Class Size Reduction Initiative that took place in 1996, as well as the federal government's work on federal class size reduction in its program in 1999. And then there's one that has negative results, and that's the California Class Size Reduction Policy that the state initiated in 2002. So I'll tell you a quick slide about each, so you have some context, because I think you'll read them in most of the literature you look at. In 1985, Tennessee randomly assigned kindergarten students and teachers to smaller classes ranging from 13 to 17 students, and then assigned others to regular classes averaging 22 pupils. The reduction was significant because they reduced class size by some 7 pupils, or some 32%. The STAR experiment is the most analyzed study out there, and it's considered the gold standard in terms of experiments because the study was randomized with but one variable, which is to say just class size. The most significant effects that were derived from this experiment were there were real benefits for minority, economically disadvantaged, and male students. Economists have looked at this study over the years and worked to calculate the return on investment, and have repeatedly noted that the long-term investment outweighed the costs. In fact, last September, an economist, Alan Kruger, wrote an article about how does kindergarten affect your earnings, and went back and actually did a long-term study of the graduates of this STAR experiment, and it was shown that the students who were in the smaller classes were actually more likely to have enrolled in post-secondary education. Then Wisconsin in 2001 had the Student Achievement Guarantee, and it led to similar conclusions as the STAR experiment. SAGE classrooms had 12 to 15 students, and they achieved higher scores than those in their comparison classrooms of 21 to 25 pupils. In the study, they also talked to teachers, and teachers reported that SAGE classrooms provided them more knowledge about their learners. They experienced far fewer discipline problems, and more time was had to individualize instruction for learners. So this 5-year study of SAGE classrooms in Wisconsin demonstrated, most importantly, that small class size had the most significant impact on children from poverty. Then we go to California. And critics of smaller class size will suggest that there's a need for more randomized experiments like the STAR study, and would suggest that no studies have really been done on using monies for other purposes, i.e. spend it on teacher quality versus reducing class size. So in California, this is kind of the poster child, which instructs us about the need to also have teacher quality as well as small class size. In California, they had an initiative where in 2 years' time, they created 25,000 new teaching positions. And they settled on reducing class size from 30 pupils to 20. And what they found through this process is they were in such a rush to fill those spots, they hired folks who were uncredentialed, people who were new to the teaching profession. In fact, there were some who worked in classrooms who didn't have a 4-year college degree. So when they looked at these results, that's why we say this study provides mixed results. Clearly, there were positive effects in the class size reduction, but they were only half as large as the STAR experiment. And students who ended up in a new teacher classes, they suffered clearly from the teacher's inexperience by almost the same amount as being in the smaller class. And then, of course, the federal government followed suit. You may remember they initially authorized in 1999 a commitment to help districts hire additional qualified teachers, especially in the early elementary grades, so that children could learn in smaller classes. They reauthorized it in 2001 under NCLB, and what we know is the federal class size reduction program actually got folded into Title II when it became a block grant to the state. Full disclosure, we still use that money in our district for class size reduction. We hire 2 professionals using those federal dollars. But basically, an analysis of this really only went to what did districts who used their monies for CSR realize, and the results are at that bottom of the slide. Average class size only went to 18 in K, 20 in grade 1, and 21 students in grades 2 to 3, which is to say using those federal monies did not realize a significant enough reduction in class size to be what other studies would suggest is significant. And then we have the negative one, which was Florida's CSR policy in 2002. It's the final large-scale implementation where Florida voters actually approved an amendment to their state constitution in 2002 setting limits for class size. They wanted 18 students in grades K-3, they wanted 22 in grades 4 to 8, and then 25, no more than 25 in grades 9 through 12. Implementation of this policy has cost Florida some $20 billion in the last 8 years, and it's expected to be about $4 billion annually to sustain it. And they did achieve the mandate. It took some time to ratchet up. There were 23 students in K in the first year. They're now down to under 16 in their kindergarten classrooms. But critics and people who look at it will look at the statewide assessment administered in grades 3 to 8 and say there has been no positive impact as a result of this significant investment on the part of the state of Florida. So, you all know New Hampshire hasn't implemented any statewide CSR policy. However, it does have rules regarding class size. In grades K2, the maximum is 25 students, and says that each school shall strive to achieve class size of 20 or fewer. In grades 3 to 5, it's 30 or fewer, but each school should strive to keep it under 25. And in grades 6 to 12, the standard is 30 or fewer per teacher. There are certain exceptions, and in the interest of safety, science lab classes as well as career and technical ed classes shall not exceed 24. We did take a look at our cohort to see what our cohort had out there in terms of any policy or guidelines, and we found that 3 out of 4 do. Oyster River sets a target not to exceed 18 in K and not to exceed 20 in grades 1, 2, and 3. They also have not to exceed numbers in their other grade spans. Governor Wentworth strives to keep K2 classes under 20, and Merrimack Valley has a guideline of 15 to 20 in K3. And then it was interesting, I don't know why I was reading this, but I went back and was reading the report of the redistricting committee. And they actually had, on page 5, they had talked about what was acceptable classroom size. The board accepted that report, and it was clear the committee recommended efforts on the part of the school board to keep class size at 16 to 20 students. And while the range was not absolute, they would serve as a guideline for administrative scheduling and budget purposes. And then lastly, there's the teacher contract. You know, typically during the last couple of budget sessions, the teacher contract and its provision here in Article 23 is usually referenced. And that language, 23.1, talks about class size at the elementary school level. The ideal class size is 20 to 24, and then suggests 24 to 27 at the middle and high school levels. Actually, I went back and I started looking through contracts to see when did this policy come about, et cetera, and the only contract I have available on hand is a 1979 contract. Language in 23.1 is exactly the same.
Wow.
It hasn't changed.
I think that's the weighting.
The weighting of the handicapping students has changed, but that language about an ideal class size has not. So it's important to note that that's not suggesting that that's the ideal class size. It involves the weighting of children, which is to suggest students come to us with varied needs, etc. So, you know, the reading I shared with you from ASCD, I think, makes clear that smaller class sizes encourages personalization. It provides settings to engage in higher order thinking skills, problem solving, critical thinking. Larger class sizes are always appropriate when one is doing a lecture format, where the teacher is imparting factual information, or students are engaged in some low-level skill acquisition. But to be sure, I think investment in smaller class size has to be accompanied with changes in teacher practice, whereby students are engaged in small group work, they have hands-on projects, teachers are monitoring student progress against goals, and they have the opportunity to build meaningful relationships with their learners. So, you know, we began, this is a quick foray into the literature, there's more to say about it. We began with some general questions. Does smaller class size have a positive impact on learning, and if so, how much? We believe the findings from the STAR experiment suggest it can have a significant impact at grades K3, and that long-term benefit analysis suggests that if you sustain it, they're likely to outperform their classmates at the high school level, more likely to take advanced coursework, they're less likely to drop out or be retained, and they benefit academically over, and academic benefits by economists suggest that if you do that for 4 years, you gain some 6 to 14 months of additional schooling. I believe, pedagogically, we have the right approach. I mean, we have those practices as part and parcel of what we're doing, and we're working in PLCs to help improve teacher knowledge and skill. So I think our approach has been sound, and our investment over time, as you know, has been to work to keep K3 classes 20 or less. Obviously, we've run into some problems in terms of the school choice issue this past year, but in the other two schools, we've pretty much achieved it currently. We looked at, I think when we get to the higher grades and have some conversation about that, I think it would be wise to keep classes in line with our cohort groups if we wish to sustain personalization, promote critical thinking, have problem-solving skill approaches in classrooms in terms of engaging children and monitoring their progress and making it all doable. So I just kind of wanted to lead you in. I didn't know if you would all have read this over the weekend. I just wanted to kind of give you a starting point for a conversation and a workshop, so that we can, you can, in your wisdom, tell us, okay, about appropriate class size. Yes, Ann.
I read about half of them. Basically, I would agree with what you've said, that we are doing pretty much what the research is saying is really important to do. Bottom line, it's all about the teacher. If you have a really good, qualified, experienced, certified teacher, there's a whole lot more that's going to be happening. It doesn't mean we need to have an enormous class, but it means that it's more important to have that experienced teacher than it is to just have a smaller class with a less experienced teacher. I was appalled to see that some of them were not even certified in some of those studies. That was amazing. But each of them that I read basically were saying the same thing. It's really all about the quality of the teacher. So, agreed.
So, what struck me when I read this stuff, and I did read it, is the one takeaway I have is, in fact, the results of every study is mixed. And every single study pointed to the STAR Tennessee study as, to your point, the gold standard. And they were hard-pressed, although you identified others. The other documents here were hard-pressed to extend that beyond that one study. And so for me, it really is Ann's point, is what's most important is the teacher in the classroom and the quality of that teacher. And I think, in my mind, given that, and I'm not suggesting we're approaching it wrong, but based on the studies that are available, it's certainly not a silver bullet.
No.
And I believe there are people in the community and people across the country who believe it is. And when you have conversations with people, their primary measure of success or failure is class size. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we allow that impression to remain. Because at best it's an imperfect measure, but because not even getting to the point that even the STAR study defines small class size as 15 students. And so you really need to get, and what we don't know in these studies is, do the results hold true if you're at 17 or 18 or 19 or 20? There's no sense of understanding what the impact is based on the studies. So I'm not suggesting we have the wrong approach, but I do think there's an opportunity here to educate both ourselves, the education community, and the broader community in Portsmouth of understanding how class size fits in the other performance measurements we have. And I'd like us to see us take the conversation more to teacher performance and how we manage our talent and how we develop our talent. And at the end of the day, being able to measure the quality of our teachers, and hopefully, and I think we're moving in that direction, of having them be able to say with a level of certainty that we have the best teachers in New Hampshire, and we're confident that they're providing a quality education. So it's just more, in my mind, it's more nuanced. I don't think it's either way, right? No, I don't think it is at all. But I think it's more nuanced than maybe what your slides were sort of suggesting. I just think it's more nuanced. Because I don't want people thinking that, well, yeah, so the solution is class size, so drive down class size in K through 3. And I don't think you can get there to size 15 given our
I don't know if I was suggesting that, Dexter.
Yeah.
No, what I'm saying is that I don't want people to take that away. I know you weren't suggesting it, but I want people taking it away that, in fact, class size is the most important measurement. I'd argue it may be one of the lesser important measures.
Okay, so I have Rebecca, Carol, and then Liz.
Thank you for putting this together. I think it's great. One of the things that I took away from it, especially with Florida, is that they reduced the class size, but they didn't do it enough. I think it all seems to say going from 24 students to 22 students doesn't accomplish anything. It's going from 22 students to 17 or 16 or 15. So I thought that was really, really important, that if you that you have to remove 30% of the students, up to 30% to get it down. And I think that that's something that this board should keep in mind, that we're going from 24 to 22 you might as well not, it almost seems like you might as well not do it. You need to really make a big change. And I do think it's important. I don't think there's any one thing that makes education important. But I definitely think that this is that one of the big issues that we need to talk about. But I thought this was great. So hopefully we can work with the state on figuring out where kids are going to go.
Okay. Carol?
I think the question needs to be, what cost is whatever the policy is? And asking ourselves, is this worth it? The money we're spending, the dollars we're putting into this, is it worth it? Or would those dollars be better spent on teacher quality? And so I just want to read, this is a quote from Michael Bloomberg. He says, if you're going to spend an extra dollar, personally, I would always rather spend it on the people that deliver the services. Mr. Bloomberg said when asked about the report on Thursday, calling class size an interesting number, it's the teacher looking a child in the eye, and teachers can look lots of children in the eye, he added. If you have to have smaller class size or better teachers, go with the better teachers every time. So again, from what was stated earlier, I think the teacher quality, and that's, once again, I think this administration, the school board, I would like more the takeaway point from all of this discussion not being we're doing the right thing with class size and class sizes, but more we're doing the right thing with focusing on teacher quality. Yeah. And I don't think we're doing anything wrong with respect to class size. You know, in my opinion, I think Florida did the wrong thing. We're not doing the wrong thing. I don't know that we know that we're doing the right thing, really, where the reports are so mixed and everything is so varied. And the other comment I have is all of this seemed to me to not go very deep. Like, for instance, they're constantly saying that you see the impact on children who are below the poverty level. You see that again and again, study after study. But they don't get into why that is. Why is it that class size makes a greater impact on children who are below the poverty level? I mean, tell me why. That's one of the questions that should be answered. And it's not answered. It's not even addressed. You know, so to me, it could go a lot deeper. But I guess the bottom line that I want to say is I really think the takeaway point should be quality teachers. And, you know, that's what I feel really comfortable with. Class size, I'm not comfortable with saying anything definitively one way or another with respect to class size. But I agree with Dexter. I would say that most of the parents that I talk to, the first thing they say is what their child's class size is. And it's the first concern. I was actually at dinner last night, and a woman was telling me all about her son and how huge his class was. And I think I knew whose class it was. And she was going on about it, and she was distraught. And it was all about the class size, and she was interpreting how her son was doing related to the class size. So I firmly agree that I think there's a very strong perception on the part of parents that it's all about class size. So I think we have to be careful how this is communicated and understood. It's complicated. It's not simple. I don't think it's black and white.
Yeah, and then I'll get back to you. Liz?
I guess, well, first of all, I want to say sorry I'm late. I was coming from both of the classes, and the seniors won, so. But, I mean, as a student in the high school, I mean, I personally like smaller classes. I think I learn better, and when you're in a big class, it's just like there's constant talking, and I know that stresses out the teacher, and I think it's like they don't perform their best when they're stressed out. And I think in a smaller class, teachers definitely perform better because there's less talking and it's more intimate. So, I don't know, I guess just from my perspective, I think that class sizes, yeah. I mean, definitely teacher quality matters as well.
Right.
But I don't know if teacher quality is brought out by smaller classes or something. Yeah.
That's an interesting point. Linda?
So, I don't know if it's somebody in my class that you're eating dinner with, but...
It's a small town.
So I have 24 kids in my class, and just for those kids are brand spanking new, and none of them are a result of choice.
Right.
They're just people who moved or whatever, through whatever you do. So, just from my perspective, and I will tell you that I'm pretty full of myself, so I think I'm a pretty darn good teacher.
Get out.
So, I'll go down with the best of them. I will tell you, though, the part that bothers me is the fact that I like to have personal relationships with the kids, so that I know them intimately. I know what books they read. I know I can go to them next year and say, Daniel, have you read this book, because I know you like this? And I feel like that 24 kids puts me out. I can't be doing that all the time. I can't be having those kinds of relationships. That's the part that I miss. I want to know your family. I want to know what's going on. I want to know what you're doing, because that's the stuff that gets missed, for me anyways. And I think parents appreciate the fact that when you sit down and you have a conference with them, you sound like you're talking about their kid. I'm hoping that that's what I sounded like a week or so ago, but it doesn't sound as good as it does when you only have, like when I have 18 kids to know, I know them that much better. 24 just about puts you over the beam. But along with that is the fact that because the budgets have been cut and cut and cut and cut and cut, it's not just the teacher that's up there, it's the people who support the teacher to help deliver the support services, like the paraprofessionals or whoever else comes in. That is unbelievably critical. And that's the stuff that's in tremendously short supply at this point. I can be on my A game, but if the people aren't there, that's problematic. So, I agree. I think you're on the right road, but it's not about the class size. It's about the class size. It's about the teacher. It's about the support. It's about the air quality. It's about all that stuff. And I don't know. It's not just one thing. It isn't just about class size, because you can have a great person running a class of 24, or you can have somebody who doesn't know what they're doing running a class of 24. Let's assume that people who survive me for the year are going to have a relatively great experience. Although today when we're trying to wire electrical houses, I'm not sure what kind of experience we were having, but, we all survived. Nobody died. So we're good. And we're all still smiling. I just think it's not just that one thing that you can look at, and it's a tough sell. I know when budgets come up, you want to look at that. It's not just that. So I would agree with your thinking around that.
So I have Ann, Kent, and then Leslie.
I was just going to respond to Carol's comment about the overemphasis on the class size issue. I think because it's been talked about so much recently, but with most of the literature plus my own experience, teachers enjoy smaller class size for the same reasons Linda had. You really know your kids really, really well. You know everything about them. You know their families. And so the teacher's feeling good about this, and the children are feeling good about this, because they also know their teacher really well, and they know the other kids well. And the parents are feeling the same aspect. So it's kind of a win-win-win all over the place in terms of that. But it's not the only issue by any means. So I just wanted to say that.
Kent.
A couple of things. God, I love it when we really talk about education and not budgets and everything else. 18 years ago, when I first was elected onto the board, actually, you got to remember, I ran 2 years before that, and so 20 years ago, I remember one of the very first questions I was ever asked by a group was, will more money solve educational issues? And my response at that time was no, you have to hire the best, but the best do come with a cost, and we've seen that. One thing I'd like to get somewhere along the lines, I think what we are is the Titanic. We've just touched the iceberg. There's a lot more to that iceberg, because one thing I haven't seen in any of my time is comparisons, and yet we're always compared during the political season to all the other nations. Now, I know nations, our kids are getting beat by, Switzerland, they're getting beat by, Bulgaria, they're getting beat, whatever seems to be the flavor of the day, a candidate sort of pulls this out, and some of it's true. One of the things that's missing out of that is that they're not measuring all the kids. They're measuring the kids that go on to further education at Pupil. But I'd like to know what international class sizes. I mean, there's got to be something out there, and I'd like to know,
They'd exceed the state's minimum school approval standards.
What was that right there?
Yeah, I don't even think that's a problem.
it exceeds, so.
Most countries.
So if they're beating us, that's probably not, it is something, again, it's a talking point. But class size, I read here that you talked about the Florida one, and I remember that when it happened, and we were talking about it on the board at that time, and how that was, and will the state of New Hampshire mandate? Well, it will never happen in the state of New Hampshire. We have home rule, and home rule will never allow the state to dictate class sizes. What we do, what Manchester does, what Errol, New Hampshire does, can't be quite reflected the same. So, as much as the state, we want to look at them for guidance sometimes, I think we have to be realistic on that. You talked about it as, I think it was Dexter, I was reading, the educational community, and we represent that. And that's why I'm excited that, for a long time, we do a lot of talking, and I know this is a workshop-type session, but I do think we need to roll up the sleeves. I would never want to see this become a subcommittee. This is the type of discussion the full board needs to stay engaged in and bring forth, 9 different views of it. Subject matter, I think, is something also I don't see in the study. And believe me, I'm a strong believer of the unified arts, but I know the unified arts have much larger classes, and I never want to put safety at restriction or have safety issues out there, whether it be gym or art or so forth, because I think safety, but again, I think there are classes. I think foreign languages will have differences too. Math may be different. Again, I don't know if there's any studies out there that will do subject matter. Then also, I think we have to look at social skills within the classrooms. I know, because I've worked with Linda a long time on that, is that, we have the weighted type students. I know that's discussed here, but I think our children, and this hits home to me very hard at this time, as Linda and I were talking before the meeting, she used to sign in all her classes. And we've integrated, it's much more different, and I'll talk about, we walked to school barefoot, and there were 700 kids in one class, or whatever the number was. But when we went to school, the child who had certain handicaps, certain needs, was not present most of the time. And that is a big thing that I've come to appreciate in the last year or so, that, being integrated with that needs to be done, but it comes at a cost, both educationally and financially. And lastly, again, sitting next to Linda here, she doesn't know, how her class size is. I can tell you that at least one of your students will have her doctorates in 4 months, so. Thank you.
Thank you. Leslie?
So I think this is a very helpful conversation. I agree with Kent that it's good to have the conversation with everybody. It's also interesting to me that we pushed, I think some board members for a while have been pushing to have a policy or guidelines or something that are very clearly spelled out, and I feel like we're backing away from that a little bit, which I don't disagree with. But I do think that it's helpful to have guidelines or a policy or whatever so that we can refer back to that and use that as a baseline. Whether we make it flexible to some degree or whatever. But what I wanted to ask is, you use the cohorts and you said that they have guidelines or policies. Is each one different? Is it some do guidelines, some do a policy? Where do they have it written? Is it in their handbook?
They're in their policy manuals, basically.
Okay, so it is a policy.
But they're guidelines. They're not absolute.
Okay, 'cause we don't have a policy.
No. When I arrived, there was a general sense, I think you had read a couple of articles. Class size was very important when I first got here, and we've been operating with K3, 20 or less. That's kind of been the unofficial guideline, if you will, and then I think we've accepted higher numbers, 4 or 5. The middle school and high school, just kind of because of various courses, et cetera, it seemed to, but in a general sense, they're probably 24, somewhere in that order. They vary, of course. You're going to have some AP classes at 10 and 30. There's a whole mix there. So I'm not. I hope. I said to Steve, I said, look at this, because I'm trying to present this as factually and fairly as possible on the topic, and I think I could have had an hour PowerPoint on this. The results are mixed. Huh? What's that?
We appreciate it.
No, I thought you might on that.
You're such a good.
I just wanted to kick off the conversation. I meant that seriously.
So you're not making recommendations, you're just
reporting
out.
But I feel, as the chair, can I just, sorry, one more thing. I'm the chair of the policy committee, and it's come back to us several times. And I feel like we need to finish this. We need to close this loop and have a policy, whether it's a flexible policy or we have some different aspects we take, like the teacher's contract or whatever. I feel like we need to close that loop and finally come up with a policy and put it in our policy manual and say, this is what we believe. Not that it's the only thing, not that it's going to, be, written in stone forever and ever, but we need to have something that we start with. So I would recommend that we do that.
So it sounds like, the conversation, could go towards looking at all of the research that we have, but then thinking it through our own classrooms and our own lens here in Portsmouth. And I think that's, for me, and as Ed had mentioned, you have these studies that, it's not one variable. And of course, in educational research, it's very hard to control for one variable. But when you bring in a number of X number more teachers, do you suffer some inequality? So I would, encourage the board to think about assume a standard in teacher quality, and then have the discussion about class size, because that's what we want to get to, is that standard. And I also think that if we look, in our own classrooms, we have some good local examples of what we're trying to do with class size, and you don't have to look much further than our elementary literacy model, which is not the norm in New Hampshire for what elementary literacy instruction looks like. And that makes it's a big difference between trying to do an LRR model in a class of 18 or a class of 25. And I also would encourage us, and I would think we would be happy to look deeper into this for you. In our own experience, and I could give you a generalization, if you think about our assessment scores that we have, they're clearly the strongest in the lower grades. And as you go up in the grades, they they drop off a little bit. So, and again, not suggesting class size be the only piece to that, but certainly our efforts around small class sizes in K through 3, as Ed had mentioned, has been our history. I would suggest is something that we do see some results in.
Okay. I have Rebecca and then Dexter, but if I could just, since everybody's had a chance, I'll say something first, and then we'll go back around. And I promised Howard we wouldn't be here for 3 hours. So a couple of things. One is, when I first read about Florida, where they actually enacted a law that set a number. So let's say, I can't remember exactly, let's say the number was 25. And you just happened to be in a school where you had to 27. Well, you had to hire another teacher, because the law says that you can't have more than 25 in a classroom. So I've always been a fan of the concept of reasonableness, because I think reasonableness changes. In good economic times, reasonableness might mean classes of 15, 16, whatever it happens to be, and reasonableness in harder economic times are closer to where we are today, where it's reasonable, given the outside economic world, that we're going to allow more students in the classroom than we want. But we know we can't afford to do it any other way. So I agree we should tackle this and come up with a set of guidelines or a policy. I worry about setting hard numbers. A couple of things that Ed talked about. One that stuck out to me was, I think, also in Florida again, where there was, they said, with all of this class size reduction, there was no impact on the statewide assessment in K-3 or in the lower grades. So I listened to that at the same time that I was hearing him also saying that, but what we're also seeing is that some of this stuff doesn't really pay off until later. So, I mean, to just judge how class size reduction might impact by looking at only, state assessment for the lower grades without giving it perhaps a little bit more time as they get older. I will point out that U.S. News and World Report, when they rank colleges and universities, because I see it down at Lowell where I work, for many of the classes, they've set class sizes. They're trying to keep classes at 19 students. And they will hire, so for all of College Writing 1, there's no more than 19 students in every class, and they've hired a boatload of adjunct faculty to teach that. But it's not necessarily because they believe that class size improves learning. It's really because they believe that class size improves your rank on the U.S. News and World Report, because it's actually one of the criteria that's used to evaluate how schools do.
Funny.
I think the point that a number of people made about teacher quality, so it really is about what happens in the classroom as opposed to how many students are in the classroom. But I do think some of the things that Linda talked about and Ed talked about in terms of pedagogical strategies that teachers are trying to do. So if you're going to have small group work, if you're going to have students engaged with hands-on, you do need to be a little careful how many students you have, because you're not going to be able to get around in that classroom to give them that instruction that they want. But it doesn't mean, that 17 is going to be perfect and you still can't do it with 22. It depends on how you structure your class. But I also think, and I see it at the university level, the number of students in the class changes the way in which teachers assess their students. So if you have 25 students in your class, well, you know what? You might not assign a 10 or 15-page paper because you're just not going to be able to read it all. And so you might do a shorter paper, or in many cases, you just might give a test with multiple choice, and then you're losing the opportunity to really get a better handle on what it is that the students have learned. Because, writing gives you a much deeper insight into what students understand, because they're struggling to explain to you what they understand. So I think, these are just some of the things that we kind of really need to keep in mind as we do that. And then the last thing was, Carol raised, it was a good question about, why is it that they don't answer, why is it that smaller class sizes seem to impact more positively students who come from poverty? Right, that's one of the things that you were asking that they don't really address. I mean, I don't have an answer. I can make up an answer. I make up a lot of things, but it does seem to sort of stress a little bit about the question of, the parents' role in improving students in their learning.
Attention.
Right, and the attention the educational focus and attention that students will get at home when they're not in school. And I think that you might find, this is a gross generalization, but you might find that, families that are in poverty part of what their focus might be is not the same as a middle class on education in terms of working strong with their kids, or they might actually be working too much to just stay above the water to actually have the time and effort. So I think there's possible answers to that. It's not outside the realm of possibility that there's good reasons why it is. And Portsmouth, we have a free and reduced lunch of 20, what is our, I can't remember.
It's about 23.5%
of our students are classified as being in poverty, so having said that, I'll go back to the list. Okay, Rebecca.
So I had a lot of thoughts go through my head, and one is the poverty. And when Linda was speaking, she was talking about not being able to connect with as many students and get to know them. And I think with poverty, you have a higher rate of working an odd shift, working multiple jobs, and not being able to support your children emotionally, educationally. So I think that that's a big part of it. Nutritionally, sleep, being plugged in front of the TV. So I think that that's why you see a greater achievement in that subset. And it's when Linda was talking about the fewer students, the more of a connection she can make. It's not an either or. It's not a small class isn't going to fix the problem, because if there's an effective teacher, they could have 3 students, and that would not be small enough. So it's a combination of having an effective teacher, having a reasonable class size, and we just can't we have to make sure we don't get stuck not defining reasonable, because the state couldn't define adequate for how many years. So I think there's the connection. She gets to know the families above and beyond. And then that made me think about looping, and maybe this should be part of this conversation as well, because if you're with a child for multiple years, and that happened at New Franklin this past year, and 14 out of 16 children requested to have the teacher the next year, which I think is phenomenal. And she was able to go in, and from day one, there was none of this getting to know you. It was, we're going to jump in feet first. And so I think I'd really like to see that part of the conversation, is maybe looping can be effective, not only keeping small class sizes, but actually making a connection, for more than just 9 months. And the final thought for this moment, going through my mind, they come, aren't you going to miss me?
Absolutely.
We have to talk about the 3-minute time limit on public comment, but
I said it was 2 minutes.
For former school board members.
I got the timer.
I want to say, my son is now in 3rd grade, and when he was in kindergarten, he had 14 children in his class. And that was such a blessing on so many levels, because I knew that the teacher, yes, she can see with many eyes, but you only have so many. And as he's gone through, his class size has increased, but it's okay now. 3rd grade is a heck of a lot different and more mature than kindergarten. It's not as crazy, the little bodies aren't quite as wiggly. So I really see why the focus is K through 3 on the small class size. I'm experiencing it firsthand right now. Having said that, I don't want him to have 25 kids or 30 kids when he hits 4th grade. But it's definitely, that's where the focus needs to be. So lots of things. Looping, K through 3, poverty. That's it for now.
Right. I agree with looping. My daughter looped 2nd to 3rd grade, and it was very helpful.
Yep.
Anyone else? Yes, Dexter. Sorry, did I miss you?
Yeah, you did. I already spoke once. So a couple of thoughts. One, if you haven't read this, for me, the best article in this handout was the Brookings Institute article. I saw that, yeah. I thought that was the most balanced and the most thoughtful, and not quite as detailed as Carol suggested, but really balanced the trade-off. And at the end of the day, it really is all about resource allocation. And I do think we have it about right. So my comments weren't to suggest that we don't, because I think we do, but I think we need to take the discussion and our communications to a different level than we've taken them up to now. To Carol's point, what that person should be saying is, you can't believe the teacher my child has this year. That teacher is incredible.
Right.
And not the size of the classroom. And the last thought is, I'm not opposed to having a policy on this, but just like the teacher contract was written in 1978 and that number never changed, the risk of creating a policy is that it puts this number sort of in stark contrast of making it perhaps more important than at least I think a lot of people around this table believe it is, because it's one component of a bunch of different dimensions. And I will read you one paragraph from the Brookings article, then I'll shut up, it's on page 12. It says the same data from the Tennessee STAR study that demonstrates long-term effects for class size reduction produces estimates of much larger effects for variation in teacher quality within schools. Thus, for example, while differences between large and small classrooms in early elementary schools had no long-term effects on the earning power of adults, differences in classroom quality did. And there are a lot of studies out there that show us the quality of the teacher in the classroom, that in fact's the driver. So I'm saying is that I think we have it about right. I think we balance it properly. I think we just need to keep the focus that we have on the quality of the teachers and what we're doing to make them the very best that they can be, and supporting them. And we communicate that clearly so that people understand it's not the size of the class that's the driver. It's the teachers in the classroom. And we're doing all of these things to make them successful. And I think then, for me, then the story holds together.
Okay.
And then I think that our strategy, our approach holds together.
Right.
I'm taking notes, Dexter. It's very good. Carol, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I think it's great that the administration took this on and dealt with this, and we're talking about it, and I think that's, that's the right thing to be doing, and I think we're going in the right direction. Soon we're going to be dealing with our next budget, and while in my perfect world we would have the highest quality teachers and a fairly small class size, actually smaller than 20, to me, I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think the dollars are there for that. So we're going to have to pick where we're going to put our dollars. And I think the public is going to ask us, well, if you want to put your dollars in class size, show us why and how it works and the benefit. And I'm still not sure. I think we're working in the right direction, but I don't know that we've really answered that question. Maybe we can answer the question. Maybe it's an unanswerable question. Certainly, the data is mixed. But I liked what Rebecca said when she said reasonable size. And I liked what Leslie said about possibly having a policy. I liked the idea of reasonable size being something that guides the policy and it being very flexible, not something where we're boxed in. But I kind of agreed with both those ideas, and I thought bringing that together might be a good sort of next step. But I think also, if this is couched in some sort of communication to the public, I think it would help, because I think it could be confusing to people if, say, we develop a policy that they're going to say, well, that means that we've made a decision that our dollar's going X, Y, and Z. But what we mean by it and what's behind it and what we're thinking. And then I just wanted to make a final comment. I have done a fair bit of research on a lot of charter schools across the country that are they've had incredible results with students, and what they're doing is the teachers are, the day doesn't end at 4. The teachers call the kids at home that night and find out what's going on and how are things, and these are kids who are below the poverty level. Most of them, their fathers are in prison. And so I guess what I'm just trying to say is that I think when you talk about that contact with students, and we talked about the poverty level, it doesn't have to be the class size. It's also just the engagement of the teacher. How much does that teacher give of their time? I mean, I think I've been at a meeting here where there was, it was the guidance counselor who we voted on in the last budget. She was texting students on their way to college interviews and at night and asking them if they got, teachers can go above and beyond, and they do. And when they do, they make a huge difference in kids' lives. Right. So, it's not just the number of teachers, it's also what each teacher does and how much they give of their time.
Well, yes, Ann.
Just to go along with what Dexter had said about that whole process of the teacher quality and how that is utilized in the classroom, that process of the teacher quality is where all of us really comes down to the pressure on our staff development and pressure on our evaluation process. It means that our evaluation process has to be honed very tightly so that teachers at all levels are improved. And that in itself is a 24/7 job.
Yes, Leslie.
To go back to the idea of communicating not what's more important, but communicating the different components of a classroom, I think that we are partly responsible for the idea that parents feel so strongly about class size being the key, because we've been talking to parents for a very long time, particularly during budget season, about reasonable class size and advocating for reasonable class size. So I think communication would be key if what we're saying is that's a component of it, but also teacher quality is very important. I also think teacher quality is a very subjective thing. And to Ann's point, how do we measure that? I think that's very subjective. And it's much easier for a parent to point at a classroom of 25 kids and say, that's not working for me, than to say, this teacher isn't working or something this teacher's doing isn't working. So I think it's very subjective, and we need to be careful about that and do that with a lot of thought.
Well, thank you for this discussion. And
Good.
great job. And I do think, we should consider moving forward in some ways with policy and having a further conversation about it.
Since I've been on the board, we've been talking about it. So
You're tired of talking about it.
I'm tired of talking about the school. And it could be something very simple. It could be just something very simple and flexible. But we need to be able to point to it and say, we do have a policy about this.
Okay. Yeah, I think I agree with that. Okay, so let's just finish up. We have a couple of things left, so we have some committee updates, JBC and policy.
So I'll be quick. If this were daytime, you could look out this window and you could see the progress that's being made on the first phase of the school. It's on schedule. The construction is on budget. What struck me talking to the teachers tonight before the meeting is there's real excitement on the staff here about the prospects of having a new school. They're also, at least in one science class, beginning to incorporate what's going on next door with some of their lesson plans. It's really exciting. That's great. So we have two big budget items left on the committee, relatively big. We have the technology budget that we've set aside about $500,000 on, and our work group has met with the technology committee on this board, Tom Martin and some of his committee members, to make sure that what we're doing in the middle school is aligned with the school districts and departments' strategy as it applies to technology. It was a good first session, and I don't think it's going to be any problem in making sure that what we deliver, in fact, is consistent with that. More work to be done, though. And the second big budget item is furniture. And we have a $1.7 million placeholder, or budget, if you will, to provide furniture for this facility. There's been a series of meetings that have been ongoing and locking down the scope of that effort, and then beginning to put a plan in place so that the RFPs go out first quarter of next year for furniture, at least for that phase of the building, because remember, we're moving in there. 7th and 8th graders are moving into that building in the fall of next year. I mean, hard to believe, but 10 months from now, we're going to have kids in that new wing. So more work needs to be done on that as well, but we're feeling pretty good. I'll tell you, the risk we have, I'll say this, we have a pretty narrow contingency. And we're going to have to manage the thing closely to make sure we come under, within the $37.5 million. The good news is Gilbane is an extraordinary general construction firm. Chad Weathers is an extraordinary project manager, and so I think I can say that the committee feels really good about where we are in construction. Leslie or Ann, do you have anything to add?
I would agree with you. And the people here at the middle school are thrilled with what Chad has been doing with the kids in terms of giving them information with the projects they're doing.
It's been great.
And in terms of the FF&E budget, John Stokel has met with teachers and has been really narrowing that scope and trying to figure out exactly what it is we need. And you're right, we need to get that out. We need to get that rolling quickly because, everybody who's building a new school wants to get their furniture in August. So we need to be ahead of that curve. So we're working on that.
Just go to IKEA.
Thank you.
Meeting next week, right?
Policy?
Finished updating all the required policies. We're working on the volunteer policy. We're sort of re-looking at that in terms of what is a designated volunteer.
That's right.
So we're kind of looking at that again to try and figure out how that is working or isn't working. We're also looking at the facilities naming or dedicating policy and trying to come up with something to bring back here. And then we're bringing for first reading student records and access on December 13th, I believe. And our next meeting is December 15th at 9.
Okay.
Did I miss anything?
Okay. I will just say what's not on here is the Elementary Education Facilities Committees will be meeting next Tuesday, I believe it is, the 29th. Right. Originally scheduled for tonight, but we had to cancel that because. Okay. Yes. Anybody have any future agenda items they'd like to speak about now? If not, feel free to email the superintendent.
Can I ask a question?
Okay.
When teams win some kind of state championship, they usually come and have a little
Recognition. Yeah, sure. So, invite the football team to the December 13th meeting.
That would be good.
Sure.
The city chambers.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So, motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Does anyone second it?
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Thank you.
We thank Mr. Stokel for the, thank you for the wonderful program.
Thank you, John.